Hello, this tutorial is going to teach you how to use the basic functions of GitHub Copilot Chat. So when you install GitHub Copilot version 1.61.0, you also get GitHub Copilot Chat version 0.12.2 installed alongside. So these are separate extensions, and GitHub Copilot Chat has a couple different ways you can interact with it. The first way is from the side panel. So when you click on this side panel button, you open up the chat. You can open and close that chat. You can also move this chat either to an entire other window or just to an editor, which you can then drag around as if it were a text editor. You can usually click the ... and then open chat and sidebar to then return either from a window or from an editor back to the sidebar. So all of those are essentially the same chat. The other chat that you can access is the inline chat, which you open using Command and then the I key, or Control I on a Windows or Linux, Command I, and that opens a little widget like this, which allows you to chat with Copilot that way. And you can use this X to close that out, or you could also use the escape key. If you had that shown, you could hit escape to close out. And finally, from the terminal, if you're what's called focused, meaning you've clicked into the terminal, you can hit Command I from there, and it'll bring up this final widget, which is similar to the side panel, but a little bit different. And you can bring this into the chat view as well by using that button. So if you had a chat going in the terminal chat, you could bring it into the side panel. The way that you interact with Copilot is just in any natural language or coding language or any abbreviations or shorthand that you prefer to use. Can't guarantee that Copilot's always going to understand what you say, but generally it just needs normal, natural language. So you could just ask a question like, hi, how are you? But it's not going to give you a very good response to that because it's designed specifically to help you with your code. As an AI, it doesn't have feelings, but it's here and ready to assist me. So I'm going to use this X to clear out both this message and the corresponding chat. You can also use Command and the backspace key to do the same thing. And I'm going to ask a more technical question, like in JS, or let's say Java, how does for work? And I hope that it would tell me something about how for loops work in the Java language. And that's pretty much what happens. It gives me a code snippet and it gives me explanation. I can do different things with this. I can copy the code to my clipboard so that I could just use like Command V to paste it somewhere else on my computer. I could use this insert button to insert directly at my code cursor in that editor, or to, if I had something highlighted, to replace what I had highlighted with that code. And then finally, I could use inserting into either the terminal or into a new file. So the terminal, this is not something I could run in the terminal, but if it were, then that would be helpful. And I could go into a new file that I could then save, even to text that this is Java language. And so when I would save that, I would want to save that as a Java file. So I don't want to save that, but those are different things that you could do with the code. And you'll see that you might get different responses depending on what kind of question you ask, so you'll just have to develop your own strategy for how best to talk to it. But keep in mind that it does accept natural English language, so you can just talk to it normally, like as if it were a human, and it's going to respond. You can also just send it messages, and it might respond even if you don't specifically ask a question. If you just provide it some code or you provide it some statements, it might have some commentary on that. You're just going to have to discover for yourself how to work with it best. And if you want to create new chats, you can use this plus button. That way you can have maybe a different chat about like what HTTP server does Wikipedia use? And maybe it won't tell me this, but maybe it will. Yeah, it uses Apache HTTP, so that's good to know. And it says my main function is to help with development topics. One thing you might notice is this little suggested message. What are some popular alternatives? So if you see a message there that you want to quickly just use, you can always use those. And you might see that little suggestion icon of the stars elsewhere in VS Code, and that just indicates that Copilot has a way that it can help you. So in this case, I have a command that created an error, and so I can explain using Copilot using a quick shortcut. And then the same applies to in your editor. When you highlight things, you can sometimes see that icon. And if you click that, then you might be able to launch an inline chat to do something there. Another comment on how you can launch the inline chat is by using your right-click menu, your context menu. So when you right-click or your non-dominant click, then you can open up a Copilot menu where you can either start that inline chat or you can start specific inline chats for certain purposes. So maybe I want it to explain something. So it's going to bypass the inline chat and go right to the side panel. But if I were to ask Copilot to fix this, it gives me some other weird suggestion that I don't like. So I can discard that change because I'm not interested in it. I could also ask it to generate tests, maybe, and it's gonna have some tests for my hello world. So I'm gonna discard that because I don't want it. But those are just different ways you can interact with Copilot using these shortcuts or using the context menu. That also applies to your terminal. If you highlight something, you can highlight something and have right click it and have Copilot explain this. You may have started seeing these various like pound and at symbols and slash symbols. And so these are just different shortcut ways to interact with Copilot a little more efficiently. And you can bring them up, a menu of them, by just typing a slash or a pound or an at. And you can read through and experiment with these different methods. But I'm just going to go basically through every one and explain what it does briefly. So if you do at terminal, that's going to anchor Copilot to talk about the terminal. So if I ask like how to make a file, then it's going to tell me specifically how I would do that in the terminal specifically. If I said at VS Code, how do I create a file? It's going to give me an answer that's specific to Visual Studio Code rather than the terminal. If I ask at workspace, this is going to ask about the files in my current workspace. And while it can't necessarily see the content of those files, it specifically cannot see the content unless you grant it access. So for the VS Code command, it's actually giving me a button to specifically do the action I requested, which is pretty cool. Whereas if I had asked about the terminal, it would have probably given me a terminal command. When I ask about the workspace, I might say like, what is the structure? And it's determining my workspace structure and getting info on it. It didn't like my shorthand. What is the structure? And it explains what files I have in there, but it might not actually know what are it definitely won't know what's the content of those files unless you specifically grant it, which kind of leads to the next point, which is the pound commands. So pound commands bring in specific context, and those start with the editor one, which is the visible code in an editor. So if you have an active editor, that means the editor that you currently have your cursor clicked into most recently and then you left. So I clicked in here and then I left, and this code is all viewable. It's visible to me. So now if I make only lines 7 to 12 visible, then I say like, what pound editor, what is it? It's only going to be able to see those 3 lines. So it's not going to know anything about the lines that come higher up. It's not going to know about 15 and 24. Whereas if I did another command, if I did pound selection, this is going to take my current editor selection and I could say, what is this? And it's going to probably tell me something about line 9. It's a single line of Python code, which is true. I have pound last terminal command. This is going to give not only the last terminal command, but also the result of that last terminal command that printed out. So if I say last terminal command, it also has looped in that selection, which I didn't intend for. but the last terminal command was this gibberish and it had this result, and it knows that that was an error because it gets not only the last command but the output from that last command. There's also terminal selection, which is what it sounds like, rather than having an editor selection, which is like that. Terminal selection is like this. So pound terminal selection, like if you just wanted to select a portion of an error message, for example, then terminal selection would be a reference to that. And you can always add things like I added, what is this? You can always add more commentary to what you're asking about. The last one that we didn't use yet is pound file, which is pretty interesting. Pound file. So I'm just hitting the tab key when I'm completing these. And then it's going to bring up this menu, and I can scroll through those or filter. And so I want to ask about the file a.py, then I'll hit the tab key or click that. So file a.py. So this file is a while loop that counts from 15 to 24. b.py is a while or for loop that counts from 15 to 25. So I could reference the file. It's going to reference the entire content of this file, regardless of what I have selected. And maybe I could use b.py, the file directive for that, or I could just use like pound selection, and then how do they relate? Since I've given two references, it can probably tell that maybe one of those counts to 15 from 15 to 24 using a while loop, and the other one uses a for loop, and that would be a good explanation. And so you can string as many of these as it will kind of allow you to do. You might reference the editor and then something something, and then you reference the file, or you reference a selection and then the terminal selection and the terminal last command and at terminal. So the order, typically your at commands should come first, whereas your pound commands can sort of go anywhere, and then your at commands typically come before your slash commands. So like VS Code, you can ask about the API for VS Code. At workspace, you can do /new and create a new workspace with a different structure. Or you can say make tests for certain code, something like that. Lots of different actions that you can use there. The important things that you want to remember are that there are different ways to access a Copilot chat, and there are different functionalities depending on how you access it. So your main way to access it is going to be this side panel here. That's going to have most of the functionality. There are some special things that you can do in the inline chat, but it's important to remember that the inline chat will only have the context of what you have highlighted. So whereas you might be expecting that this chat won't have access to your current file, this chat will definitely not have access to your current file. Even though it's sitting in your current file, it's not going to have access to things until you highlight them. So if you highlight that and then you create the chat, now it has this as context. That's important to remember. You also have your terminal chat, which is going to automatically anchor things in the terminal, and you can always navigate between these different chats. You can create new chats and go through the history. You can move your chats into different locations. And you can just chat in natural language, asking questions, making statements, asking follow-up questions. But then you can use some of these more advanced at and pound and slash commands so that you can do various commands. And if you ever forget what those commands are, you can ask for help with /help. So hopefully you have now a sense of how to use GitHub Copilot Chat in addition to the regular features of Copilot, and you can play around with different combinations and different ways to communicate with Copilot Chat to get the most out of it. So that concludes this tutorial.